Our history books might be missing a few groundbreaking chapters. What if the first pioneers of flight lived not centuries ago, but millennia in our forgotten past? This exploration will reveal 25 ancient texts and artifacts that describe advanced aerial technology, completely reshaping your view of ancient innovation. You will gain a completely new perspective on human history and the potential for lost epochs of knowledge. We will examine detailed schematics from ancient India and ask if fiery chariots in biblical visions were something more. We will see how cultures separated by oceans all spoke of gods and heroes who mastered the sky. What common thread connects these stories across continents and centuries, and what could it possibly mean for our understanding of progress? By the end, you will hold a compelling new lens through which to see the ambitions of our ancestors. What does it suggest about the true timeline of human discovery? The answers are written in manuscripts, etched into deserts, and carved from wood, waiting to be understood. Are you ready to see the past not as a linear march, but as a landscape filled with mysterious peaks and profound valleys? Deep within the ancient libraries of India rests a manuscript that reads like an engineer's manual for the heavens. Its name is the Vaimanika Shastra, and it is attributed to a sage named Maharishi Bharadvaja, a figure of profound wisdom said to have lived in a time long before our recorded history. This text does not speak in vague myths or poetic metaphors. Instead, it offers startlingly precise instructions for building and operating Vimanas, sophisticated flying machines. It catalogs different models, each designed for specific purposes, from personal transport to aerial warfare. One design, the Shakuna Vimana, is described with anatomical detail, its structure mirroring the form and function of a great bird, complete with layered wings and a fuselage built for agility. The text delves into material science, recommending specific alloys for durability, and describes propulsion systems that defy conventional understanding of the era. It mentions engines powered by mercury, suggesting a grasp of principles that would not enter mainstream scientific thought for centuries. Researcher Dilip Kumar Kanjalul dedicated years to studying these claims, analyzing the Sanskrit verses for any trace of plausible, lost physics. His work highlights the internal consistency of the descriptions, a technical coherence that seems out of place in a purely mythological work. Yet, a shadow of doubt hangs over the manuscript. Many academic historians point out that the version we have today was compiled and published in the early 20th century, a time when global fascination with aviation was skyrocketing. They argue it could be a brilliant creative synthesis, a pseudepigrapha weaving ancient concepts with modern inspirations, so we are left with a compelling puzzle. Is the Vaimanika Shastra a rare, preserved fragment of a forgotten technological epoch, a detailed blueprint from a time when humanity once looked down upon the earth from craft of its own making? Or is it a testament to the incredible prophetic imagination of ancient minds who dreamed of flight with such specificity that their visions eerily predicted the future? If such knowledge was indeed real and widespread, its complete disappearance from the historical record is itself a profound mystery. What event or series of events could have severed the thread of that understanding so completely, leaving only cryptic instructions in a single, debated text? To find a possible answer, we must look to a story where the sky was not just a highway but a battlefield. The Pushpaka Vimana soars through the pages of the Ramayana not as a fleeting mention, but as a central, tangible element of the story. Its narrative is one of conquest and reclamation, a vehicle with a documented history. According to the epic, this resplendent flying palace was originally crafted by the divine architect Vishvakarma for Kebra, the god of wealth. Its story takes a turn when the demon king Ravana, in a display of his formidable power, seizes the Vimana for himself. This act of theft sets the stage for its most famous journey. After defeating Ravana, the hero Rama uses the magnificent craft for his return to Ayodhya, a journey of homecoming that is celebrated to this day. The descriptions are far from vague. Translations speak of a self-moving chariot that obeyed the command of thought, a spacious vehicle adorned with palaces and gardens, capable of traveling at will through the sky without any audible noise. One passage allows Rama to gaze down upon the landscapes and cities of his kingdom, offering a panoramic view that implies both great altitude and controlled, smooth flight. For those reading it as more than allegory, these are not the attributes of a simple magical cloud or a vague divine aura. They are operational characteristics. A noiseless propulsion system, a navigational interface seemingly linked to mental command, an enclosed, life-sustaining environment for passengers. This level of narrative detail, consistent across thousands of verses, prompts a difficult question. Is it more plausible that ancient poets invented the intricate mechanics of silent, thought-guided flight as a mere metaphor for speed? Or could they have been describing a technology so advanced it was indistinguishable from magic, a relic from a prior age woven into their cultural memory? Traditional scholarship views these accounts as sublime poetry, symbolic of a deity's transcendent power and mobility. Yet the specificity lingers, a persistent echo of something that feels engineered. This theme of majestic, piloted sky chariots is not confined to the Indian subcontinent. A very similar resonance appears in the foundational texts of another great ancient culture, where wheels within wheels moved through the heavens, observed by a prophet in a state of awe. The scale of conflict in the Mahabharata shatters any notion of ancient warfare as a simple clash of infantry. This epic, a cornerstone of Indian literature for over 2,000 years, describes battlefields where the very fabric of reality seems torn by forces beyond comprehension. Heroes and demigods clash with weapons that sound eerily familiar to a modern reader. There are accounts of a single projectile, the Brahmastra, charged with the power of the universe. Its detonation is described not with vague magic, but with terrifying specificity. Ancient verses speak of a brilliant pillar of smoke and fire as bright as 10,000 suns, a blast so intense it incinerated entire armies and left the land barren for generations. Survivors are described suffering from symptoms that read like a clinical list of radiation poisoning, losing their hair and nails. These are not isolated poetic flourishes, but consistent, repeated descriptions woven into the narrative fabric of a civilization's foundational story. How does a culture that had not yet smelted iron conceptualize the lingering, invisible sickness of a contaminated landscape with such haunting accuracy? This theme of overwhelming power extends into the sky itself. The epic details aerial duels between Vimanas, sophisticated craft used for reconnaissance and direct attack. The hero Arjuna is said to have flown in such a vehicle, surveying the battlefield from above and engaging enemy craft. One verse describes a Vimana as a celestial car with sides of iron and clad with wings, a phrase that evokes a constructed, mechanical object rather than a mystical cloud. Furthermore, the legendary sunken city of Dwaraka, associated with the epic's hero Krishna, is said in other texts to have been designed with specific aerial ports, suggesting infrastructure for these flying machines. Authors like Erich von Däniken famously pointed to these passages as clear evidence of advanced prehistoric technology, interpreting the Brahmastra as a nuclear device and the Vimanas as aircraft. Mainstream historians, however, urge extreme caution. They argue this is a classic case of anachronism, of projecting our 20th and 21st century fears and technologies onto ancient symbolic poetry. For them, these are powerful metaphors for divine wrath and the catastrophic cost of war, rendered in the most devastating imagery available to the poets. Yet, the dichotomy presents a fascinating puzzle. Are these simply the most extreme metaphors a brilliant ancient mind could conceive, or could they be the distorted, mythologized memories of a cataclysm so profound it reset human civilization? If they are metaphors, they are unnervingly precise ones. If they are memories, they speak of a technological peak so devastating that its only legacy was a warning, etched into epic poetry. This forces us to ask a profound question about the nature of myth itself. Could some of humanity's oldest stories be a form of fossilized history, where the bones of real events are encased in the layers of allegory and time? The terrifying visions of the Mahabharata show the sky as a domain of ultimate power and destruction, but other ancient texts present a very different vision of aerial travel, one focused not on conquest, but on majestic, peaceful journey across the cosmos. The sky above ancient Babylon held a vision so complex it has fueled debate for 2.5 millennia. By the Kebra River, the prophet Ezekiel, living in exile in the 6th century before the Common Era, witnessed an event that would become one of the most analyzed passages in religious history. He describes not a simple angel or a flash of light, but a structured, mechanical-seeming apparition descending from the heavens. This is the vision of the Merkaba, the divine chariot. His account in the first chapter of the Book of Ezekiel is meticulous. He speaks of a great cloud with flashing fire, and within it the likeness of 4 living creatures, each with 4 faces and 4 wings. Their movement is synchronized with a sound like many waters, like the voice of the Almighty, a sound of tumult like an army. Beneath these creatures was something that has captivated modern readers most of all, a description of wheels. And their appearance and their work was as it were a wheel within a wheel. When they went upon their 4 sides, they turned not as they went. The rims of these wheels were described as high and awesome, full of eyes all around. Above it all was a likeness of a throne like sapphire in appearance, and seated upon it, a likeness with a human form. The entire construct moved with a unified intelligence, for wherever the spirit would go, they went, the wheels rising alongside them, for the spirit of the living creature was in the wheels. This is not a fleeting glimpse, it is an operational report. The whirring wings, the coordinated movement independent of traditional turning, the gleaming canopy, the integrated intelligence between the living beings and the wheels, these details read less like abstract spiritual poetry and more like an overwhelmed witness struggling to describe advanced machinery with the only vocabulary he possessed. Centuries of Jewish mystical tradition, the Merkaba mystics, meditated on this vision as a blueprint of the cosmos and a path to divine ascent, seeing it as a profound spiritual metaphor. Yet in the 20th century, a new interpretation emerged. Former NASA engineer Joseph Blumrich, tasked with debunking the idea that Ezekiel saw a spacecraft, ended up doing the opposite. He applied his engineering expertise to the biblical text, treating it as a technical document. In his analysis, the wheel within a wheel became a description of omnidirectional landing gear or gyroscopic systems. The likeness of a firmament, terrible crystal, stretched over the heads of the creatures, was interpreted as a transparent canopy. The 4 living creatures with their multiple faces became symbolic descriptions of integrated propulsion units or even landing legs, their faces representing directional thrusters. Blumrich produced schematics for what he called Ezekiel's spacecraft, arguing the vision's internal consistency pointed to an observed physical object. This raises a pivotal question for our exploration. Was Ezekiel's experience a purely spiritual revelation, a metaphorical vision given to a prophet in exile to convey God's majesty and omnipresence, rendered in the most awe-inspiring imagery of chariots and thrones? Or was it, as some suggest, a genuine encounter with a technology so far beyond his understanding that he could only frame it in the religious and symbolic terms of his time, interpreting its pilots as angelic living creatures and its command seat as a divine throne? The vision's impact is undeniable, and its details are strangely persistent. It connects to a broader tapestry of Middle Eastern accounts where the boundary between the divine and the technological seems to blur, where the sky was not empty, but traversed by beings and vehicles of immense power. This theme of majestic aerial transport finds a startling parallel far to the east, in a land where emperors were said to command the winds. While Ezekiel struggled to describe the divine machinery in the sky, another ancient kingdom claimed its royalty traveled by it. The Kebra Nagast, Ethiopia's national epic compiled in the 14th century, presents a history where sacred lineage and celestial transport are intertwined. This text, which means the glory of kings, traces the Solomonic dynasty's divine right back to the union of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. But her journey to Jerusalem is depicted in a way that challenges the familiar camel caravan. According to this account, the queen did not undertake a months-long desert trek. Instead, she was conveyed in a heavenly chariot, a vehicle that covered the immense distance between her kingdom and Solomon's court in a miraculously short time. This is not a minor detail, it is central to the narrative's grandeur, establishing her as a monarch worthy of divine favor and advanced means. The aerial theme continues with the most sacred object in the story, the Ark of the Covenant. The Kebra Nagast recounts how the Ark was later taken to Ethiopia, not by slow ox cart over rugged terrain, but through the skies, guided and protected by celestial power. The text describes these vehicles as luminous and swift, moving by divine will rather than any visible earthly mechanism. Scholars of Ethiopian literature, like the work of Miguel F. Brooks in his translation, emphasize the text's profound symbolic importance. It is a foundational myth of national and religious identity, blending biblical tradition with local legend to affirm Ethiopia's special place in sacred history. The heavenly car is a symbol of legitimacy, a divine endorsement of the Solomonic line, yet the specificity of the motif is intriguing. Why would a 14th century text, glorifying a dynasty's ancient origins, choose instantaneous aerial travel as its emblem of prestige and divine connection, unless that concept held a deep, resonant power in the region's cultural memory? Some researchers looking for patterns suggest these stories could be distant echoes, a kernel of truth preserved across millennia about a form of transport or technology so advanced it was later remembered only as miraculous. The descriptions focus on effects, luminosity, and impossible speed, rather than mechanics, which is precisely how an advanced technology might be recorded by those who witnessed it without understanding it. This connects to the legendary wisdom of King Solomon himself, said in various traditions to encompass command over the winds, the jinn, and the secrets of the natural world. Could such wisdom have included knowledge that allowed mastery of the skies, knowledge later lost and remembered only as magic or divine favor? The question the Kebra Nagast quietly poses is this: are we reading a purely symbolic legend crafted for political and religious purposes, or is it possible that across Africa and the Middle East, independent cultures preserved fragmented memories of a time when the sky was a road for the powerful and the sacred? This theme of lost knowledge carried on the wind does not belong to any one continent. It finds a powerful and logical counterpart in the rational, philosophical air of the classical world, where a great thinker dared to dream of reaching the moon. The golden arc of the sun was not a simple ball of fire to the ancient Greeks, but a brilliant vehicle on a celestial highway. In their rich tapestry of myths, the sky was a busy thoroughfare for the gods, each with their own specialized craft. Helios did not merely will the sun to rise, he drove it across the firmament in a chariot of gleaming gold, pulled by fiery steeds. Poseidon, god of the sea, commanded a chariot drawn by horses with hooves that could churn the waves or gallop upon the clouds. Even the goddess Athena was said to possess a flying ship, and the legendary Argo, vessel of the Argonauts, was sometimes described with the ability to speak and offer guidance, a hint of an intelligent navigation system. These stories, immortalized in Hesiod's Theogony and the Homeric hymns, served a profound cultural purpose. They gave a face and a story to the awesome, inexplicable forces of nature, transforming the terrifying and magnificent movements of the cosmos into a divine drama that humans could comprehend. For classicists, this is the core of mythology, a symbolic language explaining the world. The consistency of the chariot motif across cultures, from India to the Mediterranean, is often seen as a shared human impulse to personify celestial bodies. Yet, when viewed through a different lens, the descriptions become curiously specific. The daily, precise, repeatable path of Helios's chariot does not resemble the erratic flight of a bird or a spirit, but a predictable orbital route. The concept of a driver controlling powerful, living engines, the horses, could be read as an allegory for piloting a complex machine with a volatile power source. This interpretation finds its most compelling and tragic example in the story of Phaethon, the mortal son of Helios. In the myth, Phaethon begs to drive his father's son chariot for a single day. Despite warnings, he takes the reins but loses control almost immediately. The chariot plunges too close to the earth, scorching continents and creating deserts, then veers too high, freezing other lands, until Zeus is forced to strike the boy down with a thunderbolt to prevent global catastrophe. If this is pure allegory, it is a powerful warning about hubris and the dangers of meddling with forces beyond mortal understanding. But some researchers ask a more provocative question: could it also be a distant, mythologized memory of a catastrophic technological failure? In this reading, Phaethon is not a reckless boy, but an untrained operator of a vehicle he did not understand, a craft with a propulsion system so intense it could alter the climate of the planet if mishandled. The story includes precise details of the Earth burning below, a description that feels eerily like an aerial perspective of a wide-scale disaster. The myth of Daedalus and Icarus, with its crafted wings of wax and feathers, further illustrates the ancient Greek obsession with artificial flight, blending brilliant invention with a clear understanding of its physical limitations and perils. So we are left to ponder, did the Greeks simply watch the sunrise and invent a beautiful story to explain it? Or were they, like other cultures, preserving the faint, fragmented echo of something real? Were the chariots of the gods merely poetic metaphors, or could they have been the only words available to describe witnessed technologies of lift, propulsion, and orbital mechanics? The line between a god's vehicle and a machine is hauntingly thin in these tales. This fascination with mechanized flight was not confined to the realm of myth, however. A few centuries later, a brilliant inventor in the city of Alexandria would put pen to papyrus and design something astonishingly concrete. The ambition of Alexander the Great was said to stretch beyond the edges of the known world and into the heavens themselves. Centuries after his death, a remarkable legend took root, transforming the historical conqueror into a pioneer of aerial exploration. This story is preserved in the many versions of the Alexander Romance, a collection of fantastical tales that bloomed from the Hellenistic period and spread through medieval Europe and Asia. In these manuscripts, Alexander's insatiable curiosity leads him to build a remarkable vessel. One version describes a basket or chariot, to which he harnesses a team of powerful griffins. In his hand, he holds a spear with a piece of meat dangling from its tip, just out of reach of the mythical beasts. As the griffins strain upward, trying to seize the bait, they lift the entire contraption, and Alexander higher and higher into the sky. Another telling from Hebrew tradition has him using great birds for the same purpose. These are not fleeting references but detailed narratives. The texts describe the sensation of ascent, the world shrinking below him. One account says he rose so high that the great armies on the ground appeared like tiny ants, and the vast ocean seemed no larger than platters of water. Most astonishing is a passage where Alexander reportedly reaches such an altitude that he sees the earth itself as a sphere, a small ball hanging in the void, a cosmological insight startlingly ahead of its time for a medieval tale. So what are we to make of this? Historians see the Alexander romance as a powerful fusion of history and fantasy, a way for later cultures to project their own dreams and anxieties onto a legendary figure. The flying machine story embodies humanity's timeless desire to conquer the air, to achieve the ultimate perspective. Yet, the specificity of the mechanics, the use of bait to motivate the lifting creatures, suggests a kind of primitive engineering logic. Could this be a distorted cultural memory of early and lost experiments with flight? Could it reference ancient observations of basic glider principles or even early hot air balloon concepts, later mythologized with griffins? The persistence of the theme across Persian, Hebrew, and European versions is telling. It speaks to a universal impulse to attach the power of flight to our greatest heroes and leaders. Why do so many cultures imagine their legendary founders and kings commanding the skies? Perhaps because true mastery, the ultimate symbol of power and knowledge, has always been imagined as looking down upon the world rather than being bound to it. Alexander's celestial journey marks a fascinating point where history, myth, and a deep-seated human aspiration collide. This yearning to ascend, to see the world from above, was not unique to the Old World. Far across the Atlantic, in the dense jungles and high deserts of the ancient Americas, other cultures told their own stories of celestial visitors and sky-born gods, stories etched not only in manuscript but in the very landscape. The primordial world of the Popol Vuh is a canvas of water and sky. Before there was land, before humanity, the creator gods Tepu and Gukumats existed in the void, and their first act is described with a powerful, dynamic verb. They are said to have soared over the endless sea, contemplating, conferring, and finally bringing forth the solid earth from the watery abyss. This foundational text of the Kayich Maya, often called their Book of Counsel, was preserved through centuries of oral tradition before being transcribed into the Latin alphabet by a Maya nobleman in the 16th century. It is a rich tapestry of cosmology, mythology, and history, and woven throughout is a consistent theme of divine mobility. The gods in these stories do not simply appear, they travel, and often they travel through the air. They possess the ability to see everything, to survey the world from a comprehensive vantage point as they shape mountains, carve rivers, and plan the creation of life. For scholars of Mayan culture, this flight is profoundly symbolic. It represents omnipresence, omniscience, and the transcendent power of the divine, a power literally above and beyond the terrestrial realm. The gods' aerial perspective is a perfect metaphor for their creative vision, their ability to see the whole design before bringing it into being. The importance of the sky to the Maya is undeniable, evidenced in their breathtakingly accurate astronomy, their calendar systems synchronized with celestial cycles, and their architectural alignments to the stars. The story of the hero twins Hunahpu and Xbalanque, who after their trials ascend to become the sun and the moon, cements this connection between heroism, divinity, and the heavens. Yet the descriptions in the Popol Vuh invite a lingering question. When we read of these beings soaring to see, to plan, and to shape the physical landscape with intention, what exactly is being described? Is it purely a spiritual allegory for creation, or could it contain an echo of something more tangible? The language resonates oddly with the concept of aerial surveyors or engineers. Imagine a being or a group of beings with technology that allowed them to fly over a vast, undeveloped terrain. From that vantage point, they could map the land, identify resources, and direct large-scale environmental projects. To a ground-based observer with no concept of aircraft, such beings would indeed be gods, their machines indistinguishable from divine power, their comprehensive vision seen as omniscience. The Popol Vuh does not describe machines, of course, it describes deities. but the pattern of action, the functional use of flight for observation and environmental manipulation, is strikingly consistent with a technological interpretation. This forces us to consider the nature of myth itself in a new light. Could these stories be a form of encoded memory, where the incredible feats of advanced visitors or a lost civilization were passed down through generations, slowly transforming the pilots into gods and their vehicles into the act of soaring itself? The Maya, master observers of the sky, left us a puzzle where the line between celestial metaphor and potential historical observation is beautifully, hauntingly blurred. Our search for these patterns now takes us higher to the thin air of the Andes, where the very stones seem to defy gravity. The vast, arid plains of Peru hold a silent question etched into the very earth. Stretching across nearly 450 square miles of the Nazca Desert are hundreds of enormous geoglyphs, lines so precise and figures so grand they defy comprehension from the ground. From the sinuous curve of a monkey's tail to the sharp angles of a trapezoid, these creations are a monumental document written not on parchment, but on the landscape itself, and their full meaning only reveals itself from the sky. The Nazca lines, created by a pre-Incan culture between 500 years before the Common Era and 500 years after, present one of archaeology's most tangible and enduring puzzles. Their purpose has been the subject of intense debate for decades. The meticulous German mathematician and archaeologist Maria Reich, who devoted her life to their study, proposed they were a vast astronomical calendar, aligning with solstices and constellations to guide agricultural cycles. Others suggest they were sacred pathways for ritual processions, connecting communities to mountain deities or water sources in this desperately dry region. Yet the sheer scale and precision of the lines challenge a fundamental assumption. How could artists, working without the benefit of flight, design and execute images over 1,000 feet long with such geometric perfection, ensuring the proportions of a spider or a hummingbird remained flawless across the uneven desert floor? The so-called astronaut figure, a humanoid glyph with what appears to be a helmet or large head, further fueled speculation. Authors like Erich von Däniken famously argued the lines were landing strips or signals for extraterrestrial visitors, an idea that captured global imagination but is largely dismissed by mainstream scholars. A more grounded yet equally fascinating theory emerged from experimental archaeology. Researchers like Jim Woodman, inspired by local pottery depicting balloon-like objects, proposed the Nazca people might have used hot air balloons, constructed from available materials like cotton fabric and rope, to achieve a vantage point for surveying their work. In the 1970s, a team successfully launched a balloon built with these ancient materials, demonstrating the principle was feasible with the technology of the time. Whether they used balloons, sophisticated surveying techniques with ropes and stakes, or some other lost method, the inescapable conclusion is that the Nazca culture conceived of their art from an aerial perspective. They held a mental blueprint of the finished work that could only be verified from a height no human of that era was supposed to reach. This transforms the desert from a canvas into a compelling argument. The lines themselves are not a written text, but they are a clear statement of intent, a physical testament to a worldview that included the sky as an integral part of their creative and spiritual domain. If they could envision the world from above and translate that vision into earth art of staggering scale, what other knowledge of the heavens might they have possessed that was never written down? This tangible, silent mystery on the ground pushes us to look for answers in the surviving stories of the people who lived among the clouds, in the high Andes themselves. High in the Andes, the air is thin and the stones whisper of a teacher who walked among them. The Incas called him Viracocha, the foam of the sea, a name that hints at his mysterious origins. This was no ordinary deity of their pantheon. According to the creation myths preserved by Spanish chroniclers like Pedro Sarmiento de Gamboa in the 16th century, Viracocha emerged in the ancient past after a period of great darkness and flood. He was described as a tall, bearded man, dressed in a long white tunic, a figure of immense wisdom and power who traveled from the shores of Lake Titicaca. His mission was one of restoration and instruction. He walked the length of the land, shaping mountains, calling forth rivers, and breathing life into the new humanity he fashioned from stone. He taught the people the foundations of civilization, agriculture, law, and the arts, acting as a master architect for society itself. Then, his work complete, he departed. The accounts of his leaving are where the mystery truly deepens. He did not simply vanish. Sarmiento de Gamboa records that Viracocha walked westward across the Pacific Ocean, moving upon the waves as if they were solid ground. In other versions collected from indigenous oral histories, his departure is even more dramatic. He ascended into the sky or traveled by air, leaving his followers gazing upward. These are not vague spiritual ascensions. They are described as acts of travel, a journey taken by a physical being from one point to another using a method that defied the natural order. The chroniclers, hearing these stories from Inca informants, recorded them as miracles, the fitting exit for a creator god. But what if we listen to the legend with different ears? The narrative structure is remarkably consistent with what some researchers term a contact story. A singular, knowledgeable being arrives after a cataclysm, possesses advanced understanding of engineering and agriculture, transforms the landscape and society, and then departs using a mode of transportation the locals cannot replicate, appearing to walk on water or fly. His association with light, often depicted with a sun-like radiance, and his sudden appearances and disappearances, add to this enigmatic portrait. Could this be a cultural memory, preserved across generations, of an encounter with a visitor possessing technology so advanced it seemed like divine power? The idea finds a tantalizing anchor at the monumental site of Tiwanaku near Lake Titicaca. This pre-Incan city, with its precisely cut multi-ton stone blocks fitted together with uncanny accuracy, has long baffled archaeologists. Local tradition, recorded by the chroniclers, attributed its construction to the followers of Viracocha, built in a single night after the Great Flood. While modern archaeology shows a long period of development, the attribution is telling. It links the god directly to a site of profound and unexplained architectural achievement, as if the memory of advanced knowledge and the memory of advanced construction were intertwined. So we are faced with a profound interpretive choice. Is the legend of Viracocha a purely mythological framework, a beautiful story crafted to explain the origins of the world and the Inca's right to rule, with his aerial departure serving as the ultimate symbol of his otherworldly nature? Or does it contain, at its core, a fossilized truth? Could the image of a bearded teacher departing across the sky be the Andean people's way of describing something they witnessed but could not explain, the departure of a vehicle or craft over the horizon? The story challenges us to consider how a culture might record the incredible. When the only concepts available are gods and magic, how else would you describe a being who arrives with knowledge, transforms your world, and then leaves in a way that defies all logic? From the high plains of South America, this question of sky-bound wisdom finds a startling parallel in the meticulous records of an empire on the other side of the world. The quest for celestial ascent was a cornerstone of imperial power in ancient China. Among the most revered figures stands the Yellow Emperor Huangdi, a legendary sovereign credited with founding Chinese civilization. At the end of his long and prosperous reign, historical and Taoist texts recount a breathtaking finale. He did not simply pass from this world. He is said to have ascended into the heavens aboard a flying chariot drawn by a dragon. The power source for this incredible vehicle was as symbolic as it was mysterious, a ceremonial bronze cauldron, a ding, representing the very essence of his authority and the harmony of the realm. This story, recorded in works like the Shijai, the records of the Grand Historian by Sima Qian, is far from an isolated tale. Across centuries of Chinese literature, emperors and enlightened sages achieve apotheoses through flight. Later Taoist alchemical texts elaborate on these vehicles, describing cloud cars and dragon chariots used to travel between the celestial and earthly realms in the perpetual quest for immortality. For sinologists, the meaning is profoundly spiritual. The ascent to heaven is the ultimate metaphor for achieving perfection, for an individual's refined essence merging with the Tao, the fundamental principle of the universe. The chariot is a symbol of that spiritual journey, a vehicle for transcendence beyond the physical world. Yet, nestled within these mystical accounts are occasional, puzzling details that sound less like metaphor and more like mechanics. Some descriptions mention specific materials, directional controls, or even the need for a skilled pilot to navigate the winds. This has led to a fascinating line of speculation. Could these stories, at their origin, contain a kernel of truth about very early experimentation with flight? Other legends bolster this idea. There is the account of the master craftsman Lu Ban, who lived during the spring and autumn period. He is said to have constructed a magnificent wooden bird, a Mu Yuan, that, once set in motion, stayed aloft for 3 full days before landing. Another text from the 4th century before the Common Era, the Master of Huinen, briefly mentions a flying vehicle in a list of marvelous inventions. These are not gods in chariots, but engineers and their creations, so we must sit with a compelling duality. Were these purely allegorical tales, beautiful narratives designed to convey spiritual ideals and legitimize imperial dynasties by linking them to the heavens? Or could they be the faint, glorified echoes of real attempts to conquer the air, attempts whose technical details were lost, leaving only the wondrous outcome preserved in myth? This question finds its most poignant answer in a story that is not about success, but about heartbreaking ambition and loss. The legend of Wan, who stands as a stark, poignant counterpoint to the divine chariots of emperors. In the 16th century, during the Ming dynasty, an official is said to have pursued the dream of flight not through spiritual cultivation, but through sheer explosive engineering. The story, preserved in later writings and oral tradition, tells of a man who fastened 47 of the largest gunpowder rockets he could procure to a sturdy wooden chair. To each arm of the chair he attached a large kite, with 2 servants standing by to light the fuses. Wan, who took his seat, grasped the kites and gave the command. The servants ignited the array, and a tremendous roar filled the air, followed by a cloud of smoke. When the smoke cleared, Wan Hu and the chair were gone, never to be seen again. Some versions claim he reached the moon, others that the experiment ended in a catastrophic explosion. Historians of science, like those cited in the research of Frank H. Winter at the Smithsonian, largely regard the tale as apocryphal, a colorful folktale that emerged centuries later. The technology described, while primitive, aligns with the Ming dynasty's documented advancements in rocketry for military use, making the basic components plausible. Yet the story's enduring power lies not in its historical accuracy, but in its raw symbolism. It captures the universal, and often perilous, human drive to reach the heavens through ingenuity and sheer force of will. It is a story of ambition untempered by understanding, a cautionary tale about the gap between dream and reality. Modern aerospace has honored this spirit, naming a lunar crater after Wan Hu, a fitting tribute to that first, legendary attempt at rocket-powered ascent. This folklore prompts a deeper, more speculative question. Could such a story be a distorted, simplified memory of something more complex? If tales of successful ancient flight were passed down through generations, only to be ridiculed or forgotten in a later, less technologically advanced age, might they resurface in garbled form as the tragicomic legend of a man with a rocket chair? one whose attempt, whether real or imagined, represents the tangible, physical yearning to break gravity's hold, a desire that seems to echo from a much more distant past. As we leave the realm of Chinese legend, we find that same echo resonating within the sacred texts of another ancient civilization, where descriptions of divine travel carry an uncanny and very specific mechanical precision. The oldest written story of flight may be etched not in stone but on fragile clay. In the libraries of ancient Mesopotamia, among the first civilizations to develop writing itself, we find the Epic of Etana. This Babylonian text, with fragments dating back to the 3rd millennium before the Common Era, recounts the tale of a king named Etana who was desperate for an heir. His solution was not a political alliance but a vertical journey. The story tells how Etana, aided by the gods, befriended a mighty eagle that had been wounded and trapped in a pit. After nursing the great bird back to health, Etana made a request. He asked the eagle to carry him up to the heavens, to the realm of the goddess Ishtar, so he might obtain the sacred plant of birth that would grant him a son. The eagle agreed, and what follows is one of the most vivid and sequential descriptions of ascent in all of ancient literature. As the eagle climbs higher and higher with the king clinging to its back, the text describes the world transforming below them. In the first stage, the land is said to shrink, and the vast surrounding sea begins to look like nothing more than a simple irrigation ditch in a garden. As they climb further, the epic states the great sea itself appeared no larger than a farmer's breadbasket. This is not a vague, poetic statement about being high up. It is a precise, observational account of perspective shift, a direct correlation between increasing altitude and the diminishing scale of familiar landmarks. Assyriologists who study these texts, like the work of Jeremy Black in his translations, emphasize the epic's core themes. It is a narrative about divine sanction for kingship, about the vulnerability of even a ruler who must rely on supernatural aid, and about the fundamental human anxieties surrounding lineage and legacy. Etana's fear during the flight is palpable in the verses, a very human reaction to an utterly inhuman experience. The progressive shrinking of the earth, however, is what captures the modern imagination. It is a strikingly realistic detail. Anyone who has looked out an airplane window has witnessed this exact phenomenon, where cities become grids, rivers become threads, and large bodies of water contract into manageable geometric shapes. How did a Sumerian poet, whose worldview was bounded by the Tigris and Euphrates valleys, conceive of such a perspective with such accuracy? One interpretation holds that this is pure literary genius, an intuitive leap of imagination to convey the sheer height of a journey to the divine realm. Another, more speculative, interpretation wonders if it reflects a much older, shared memory. Could this be a stylized retelling of a shamanic or visionary experience, where altered states of consciousness produced sensations of flight and a god's eye view? Or, as some researchers suggest, could it be a fossilized account of an actual witnessed event, where the observation of something ascending into the sky, whether a craft, a phenomenon, or even a high-flying bird, inspired a story that tried to explain the mechanics and the terrifying, wonderful view? The Epic of Etana stands as a powerful metaphor for humanity's ancient and enduring yearning to break earthly bonds, to see our world from the outside, and to seek solutions in the realm above. It forces a simple, profound question. With its meticulous description of altitude's effect on perception, is this the earliest written record we possess of a conceptualized flight experience? This Mesopotamian vision of a skyward quest for life-giving knowledge finds a deep and resonant parallel along the Nile, where the sun god's journey was not just a story, but the engine of creation and the blueprint for a pharaoh's afterlife journey. The sun did not simply rise over Egypt, it sailed. In the cosmology of the Nile, the sun god Ra made his daily journey across the sky not as an abstract force, but as the captain of a magnificent vessel, the solar bark. This concept was not a fleeting metaphor but the very architecture of their universe, detailed with astonishing specificity in the pyramid texts of the Old Kingdom and later the coffin texts. These were not vague spiritual poems, they were functional manuals for the afterlife, describing the barks as tangible, complex ships with crews of deities, defensive spells against serpentine monsters of the void, and precise routes through the celestial and underworld waters. For the pharaoh, joining Ra's crew on this eternal voyage was the ultimate goal, a guarantee of rebirth mirrored by the actual, full-sized cedar boats buried in pits beside the Great Pyramid at Giza, ready for the king's own cosmic journey. Egyptologists like James P. Allen emphasized the profound religious function, where the bark was a symbol of cyclical renewal, order triumphing over chaos, and the pharaoh's divine right to navigate the realms of existence. The imagery is consistent in tomb paintings for millennia, showing the god standing majestically within a detailed papyrus-shaped craft surrounded by stars. Yet the operational details give one pause. The texts describe two distinct vessels, the manjet, the day boat that carried the sun across the bright sky, and the mesektet, the night boat that navigated the dangerous, star-filled Juat or underworld before emerging reborn at dawn. This is not just a pretty story about sunrise and sunset. It is a description of a continuous 24-hour orbital path, a circuit with two distinct operational phases. The Egyptians were meticulous astronomers, aligning their pyramids with stellar precision and tracking planetary movements. Could their vision of a celestial boat traversing a fixed, predictable route be purely symbolic, or might it also encode an observed principle? Some researchers note the descriptions go beyond simple river analogies. The bark has a defined structure, a crew with specific roles, and faces tangible threats along its prescribed path. This has led to a provocative, if speculative, interpretation. In an age where the only vehicles capable of long-distance travel were boats, how else would a brilliant but technologically limited culture conceptualize a luminous object moving on a perfect, repeating track through the void? If they were describing something they witnessed but could not build, the most logical vocabulary would indeed be nautical. The buried boats at Giza add a haunting, tangible layer. They were real, seaworthy vessels interred with immense effort, suggesting the concept was so vital it required a physical counterpart. So we must ask, was the solar bark solely a magnificent metaphor for a natural cycle, a spiritual vehicle for the soul? Or could it also represent an ancient, encoded understanding of orbital mechanics, a way of describing a lighted, intelligently guided object on a celestial highway, using the only lexicon of complex transport they possessed? This blurring of the line between spiritual vessel and described craft leads us to a text that is far less ambiguous in its intentions, a document that reads not like a myth but like a builder's guide. Enoch walked with God, and then he was no more. This simple, haunting line from the Book of Genesis introduces one of the Bible's most mysterious figures, a man who did not experience a mortal end but was taken directly from the earth. The ancient texts that expand on his story, known collectively as the Book of Enoch, offer a breathtaking glimpse into what that journey might have entailed. Compiled between the 3rd and 1st centuries before the Common Era, these writings were highly influential in early Jewish mystical thought and later among early Christian communities. They present Enoch not as a passive passenger, but as a celestial traveler guided by angels on a comprehensive tour of the cosmos. In the section known as the Book of the Watchers, his journey is described with a startling blend of spiritual awe and observational detail. He is shown the storehouses of the wind, the foundations of the earth, and the pathways of the stars, all framed as the hidden architecture of creation. The descriptions of angelic movement are particularly vivid. Enoch witnesses what he calls chariots, and they are unlike any earthly vehicle. He speaks of whirling wheels, their rims full of eyes, and a vision of burning fire that moves between living creatures with brightness and lightning flashing from it. The text conveys motion, sound, and intense luminosity, a sensory overload from a perspective high above the world. For scholars of apocalyptic literature, this is profound religious symbolism. The chariots represent divine sovereignty and the angelic hosts that administer the natural order, their fiery appearance denoting purity and unbearable power. The journey's purpose is to reveal the grandeur and meticulous design of the universe to a righteous man, affirming a cosmic moral order. Yet, the specificity of the language has prompted other interpretations. When Enoch describes being lifted by a whirlwind, or details the synchronized, intelligent movement of these fiery chariots across the heavens, some researchers hear echoes of a different kind of experience. In ancient astronaut literature, these passages are often highlighted as potential eyewitness accounts. Could the whirling wheels, the deafening sound, the brilliant fire, and the sensation of being carried to impossible heights describe an encounter with advanced machinery? The text even details measurements of paradise and the movements of celestial bodies with a numerical precision that feels almost scientific. This reading is further fueled by another famous section of the Book of Enoch, the story of the Watchers. These were a group of angels who descended to earth, took human wives, and most intriguingly taught humanity forbidden knowledge, including metalworking, cosmetics, and the making of weapons. This narrative presents a tantalizing idea that certain leaps in technology or culture might not have been developed slowly, but given, or perhaps imposed from an outside source. So we are left with a powerful dichotomy. Are Enoch's visions a purely spiritual revelation, a mystical attempt to map the divine realm and explain humanity's relationship with the celestial? Or could they represent an ancient mind's struggle to rationalize an encounter with technology, so advanced it could only be described in terms of angels, fire, and divine chariots? The text itself sits at this fascinating crossroads, a cornerstone of religious thought that simultaneously provides some of the most technically evocative descriptions of aerial phenomena in the ancient world. This theme of forbidden celestial knowledge does not end with Enoch, but finds a parallel in another mystical tradition that sought not just to describe the heavens, but to build a vehicle to reach them. Abraham's journey into the heavens begins not with a whirlwind, but on the wings of a bird. In the Apocalypse of Abraham, a text composed in the 1st or 2nd century, the patriarch's ascent is described in two distinct, fascinating stages. First, he is instructed to sacrifice a pigeon, a turtle dove, and a goat. As he does so, a remarkable thing happens. The text states that the angel Yahweh took the soul of the pigeon and placed it upon me, and I rode upon it. Abraham is literally carried upward on the soul or spirit of the bird, an image of organic, almost gentle flight. But this is only the beginning. Upon reaching a certain height, the mode of transport changes dramatically. He is transferred to a chariot of fire, a blazing vehicle attended by angelic beings, which then carries him on the remainder of his cosmic tour. This lesser-known apocryphal work is a cornerstone of early Jewish mystical thought, specifically the Merkaba tradition that also contemplates Ezekiel's vision. For scholars of mysticism like Dr. Andrei Orlov, who has translated and analyzed this text extensively, the imagery is deeply symbolic. The pigeon represents the soul's purity and capacity for ascent, while the fiery chariot signifies the unbearable, transformative presence of the divine. Abraham's guided tour of the 7 heavens, where he witnesses angelic choirs and learns the secrets of creation, is a classic blueprint for mystical enlightenment, a path of purification and revelation. Yet the narrative structure is strikingly procedural. It follows a clear sequence, preparation with a specific ritual, an initial lift via a biological entity, a transfer to a more advanced fiery craft, and then a guided observational journey through tiers of reality, complete with a knowledgeable pilot, the angel Yahweh, who explains what he is seeing. This structure feels less like a spontaneous spiritual vision and more like a reported itinerary. When Abraham asks questions about the cosmos, he receives direct, explanatory answers. When he looks down, he sees the earth stretched out beneath him like a mere disk, with the seas gathered together in its hollows, a perspective that once again mirrors the realistic view from altitude. This has led some researchers to draw a compelling, if speculative, parallel. The sequence of events in the Apocalypse of Abraham, from the unusual takeoff to the guided tour of celestial realms with an instructive entity, bears an uncanny resemblance to the narrative structure found in many modern accounts of alleged unidentified aerial phenomena encounters. The common elements are an altered state of consciousness or ritual preparation, a feeling of being lifted, the presence of a luminous craft, communication with non-human intelligence, and a comprehensive, disorienting view of the earth and cosmos. So we must sit with this provocative duality. Is this ancient text purely a manual for the soul's journey, a mystical map for those seeking to ascend through prayer and meditation into the presence of God? Or could it be something else, a first-century attempt to document an overwhelming technological experience using the only vocabulary available, that of sacrifice, angels, and divine chariots? The Apocalypse of Abraham does not provide a definitive answer, but it powerfully illustrates how the human mind, whether in spiritual ecstasy or profound shock, might process the incredible act of leaving the earth behind. This leaves us at a fascinating crossroads between mystical vision and potential event. But what happens when we step out of the realm of sacred texts and into the annals of recorded history, where a respected Roman author sets down an account of something inexplicable in the daytime sky? The luminous chariots of the gods were not the only lights in Egypt's ancient sky. In the 18th dynasty, during the reign of the mighty pharaoh Thutmose III, a royal scribe is said to have recorded an event that defied all celestial precedent. This account comes to us not from a discovered papyrus, but from a modern transcript of a translation, a document known as the Tulli Papyrus. According to this controversial text, in the year 22 of the pharaoh's reign, the scribes of the House of Life witnessed something astonishing. They reported that in the sky, multiple circles of fire appeared, brighter than the sun itself. These objects, described as silent and shining, moved in a disciplined formation, their positions shifting before they eventually ascended together toward the south and vanished. The text adds a curious sensory detail, noting a peculiar odor like breath left in their wake. The story of the papyrus itself is a modern mystery. It first surfaced in the 1930s when an Italian Egyptologist named Alberto Tulli claimed to have seen an original papyrus in a Cairo shop, been unable to purchase it, and instead transcribed a translation. That original has never been found, and the transcript's path through various researchers is murky at best. For most mainstream Egyptologists, this chain of custody renders the document unreliable, likely a 20th century creation or a severe mistranslation of a more conventional astronomical or religious text. UFO researchers, however, often cite it as a compelling, early example of a mass sighting of unidentified aerial phenomena, noting the description of structured, silent craft moving in unison. So why does this dubious text persist in discussions of ancient mysteries? Its power lies in its specificity and its mundane framing. This is not a tale of Ros Bark or a divine visitation. It is a bureaucratic report. It reads like an administrative log of an anomalous event, complete with a date, witness credentials, and observational details about behavior, luminosity, and even scent. This very quality makes it a perfect case study for a fundamental problem. How do we verify an ancient anomalous report when the original physical evidence is lost, and the account exists only in a contested, second-hand form? The Tulli Papyrus forces us to confront the gray area between hoax and potential historical echo. Even if this particular document is not authentic, does its existence suggest a broader, perhaps oral, tradition of recording inexplicable things seen in the sky? It pushes us to ask what the scribes of the House of Life, the scholars tasked with observing and interpreting the heavens, would have done if they witnessed something their star charts and god lists could not explain. Their likely impulse would be to write it down. This instinct to document the unexplained was not unique to Egypt. Across the Mediterranean, in the rational heart of the Roman Empire, respected historians were doing the very same thing, setting down accounts of shields that flew across the sky. Roman historians kept meticulous records of omens, but some entries defy easy explanation. Writers like Livy and Julius Obsequens compiled volumes of prodigies, strange events interpreted as divine warnings. Among earthquakes and two-headed calves, they documented phenomena in the sky that sound hauntingly familiar. Obsequens, in his work The Book of Prodigies, lists occurrences such as a spark fell from a star and grew larger as it approached the ground, and descriptions of shields moving through the air, sometimes clashing as if in battle. Another chronicle from the 3rd century before the Common Era describes a spectacle of ships gleaming in the sky. These were not presented as myths or spiritual visions. They were logged as observable, if baffling, historical events, filtered through the only framework the chroniclers had, one of religion and superstition. The significance here is profound. We are looking at potential early reports of what we might today term unidentified aerial phenomena, recorded by sober officials trying to make sense of the inexplicable. The accounts tend to fall into distinct categories. There are glowing orbs, often compared to daytime moons or nocturnal suns that lit up the night. There are flying spears or javelins described as elongated, fiery objects. And there are the famous shields, circular and often in groups, maneuvering with apparent purpose. One of the most detailed comes from the year 776, during the Saxon siege of the Frankish castle of Sigeberg. The Chronicle of the Royal Frankish Annals states that the defenders, on the verge of being overrun, saw 2 large shields, reddish in color, moving above the church, circling. The Saxons, interpreting this as a divine sign in favor of the Franks, fled in panic, lifting the siege. This forces a critical question upon us. How do we, with our modern understanding of meteorology and astronomy, distinguish between atmospheric phenomena, celestial events, and potential technological sightings in these ancient records? A bright meteor, a parhelion or sun dog, ball lightning, or even the aurora borealis could easily be described as a flaming shield or a ship in the clouds by a witness with no scientific vocabulary. The chroniclers were not trained observers in our sense, they were interpreters of divine will. Yet the persistence of certain motifs, the structured movement, the formation flying, and the detailed descriptions of object behavior, like growing larger as it descends, continue to intrigue researchers. These chronicles represent humanity's enduring struggle to categorize the uncategorizable. When the sky itself behaves in a way that contradicts all known patterns, do we file it under God, under nature, or under something else entirely? This very question was being pondered with brilliant clarity in another center of learning, during the Islamic Golden Age, where observation and reason began to peel back the layers of the unknown. While Roman chroniclers puzzled over flying shields, a 13th century Persian scholar was compiling an encyclopedia of all known wonders. Zakaria Al-Qazwini, a judge and physician, dedicated his life to creating a masterwork titled Ajat ibn al-Makukat wa Gara ibn al-Mawjudat, which translates to the wonders of creation and the oddities of existence. This was not a book of fairy tales, but a serious cosmography, a systematic attempt to document everything in the universe, from the structure of the celestial spheres down to the minerals of the earth. Al-Qazwini drew from Greek philosophy, Islamic theology, Persian legend, and the accounts of travelers, weaving them into a single, authoritative volume. Within its pages, the scientific and the marvelous sat side by side. You would find detailed diagrams of planetary orbits alongside descriptions of mythical beasts like the roc, a bird so immense it could carry off an elephant. This scholarly framework gives extraordinary weight to another entry, the account of the flying carpet. Al-Qazwini recorded the legendary history of King Solomon, a prophet and ruler gifted with command over the winds, the animals, and the jinn. One of his most famous possessions was a magnificent carpet, woven of green silk and embroidered with gold. Tradition held that this was no ordinary rug. When Solomon wished to travel, the carpet would expand to carry his entire court, his throne, and even his armies. At his command, the wind would rise beneath it, transporting them vast distances in the blink of an eye. This story finds its roots in the Quran and earlier Islamic narratives, but Al-Qazwini included it in his Compendium of World Wonders, treating it as a genuine marvel within creation's inventory. For historians of science, this text is a priceless window into the medieval Islamic mind, where observation, faith, and inherited lore were not yet separate categories. Al-Qazwini was a preserver, a collector who saved fragments of knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. But what was he preserving? Some researchers look at the flying carpet and see more than a magical plot device. They analyze its described functions. It is a stable, spacious platform. It moves silently and swiftly at the command of a single operator. It defies gravity not by flapping wings, but by seemingly manipulating the air itself. Could this be a metaphorical description of a different kind of vehicle, one that used principles we might today call anti-gravity or atmospheric propulsion? In a world without the concept of aircraft, how else would you describe a large, flat, enclosed craft that lifted off smoothly and traversed continents, if not as a magnificent carpet borne by the wind? The roc, too, fits a pattern. Cultures worldwide speak of giant birds used for transport, from the simurgh of Persia to the thunderbird of the Americas. These could be pure myth, born from the awe of watching eagles soar, or they could be another attempt to conceptualize large, flying vehicles, with the beating of mighty wings standing in for the thrum of engines or the downdraft of lift. Al-Qazwini's work forces a compelling question. As a scholar, he had access to libraries that contained texts from Alexandria, India, and Mesopotamia, many of which are now lost to us. Did his inclusion of the flying carpet and similar wonders stem solely from poetic tradition, or could he have been referencing older, more technical sources that described aerial technology in allegorical terms? His encyclopedia represents a crucial bridge, carrying ancient ideas about flight out of the classical world and into the medieval period, where they would take root in a new soil, ready to blossom in the legends of another culture. This transmission of wonder soon found fertile ground in the misty forests and castle halls of medieval Europe. Amidst the fervor and desperation of the Crusades, a letter arrived in Europe that promised a miracle. It was addressed to the Byzantine Emperor Manuel I, and it claimed to be from a figure of immense power and piety, Prester John. This mysterious Christian king was said to rule a vast utopian empire somewhere beyond the lands of Islam, a land filled with unimaginable marvels. The letter, a brilliant forgery likely crafted in a European monastery, described a kingdom where pepper grew like forests, where rivers of precious stones flowed, and where the fountain of youth granted eternal life. But one detail stood out with particular clarity. The text claimed that Prester John possessed a magnificent throne, crafted from a single, enormous emerald, supported by pillars of crystal. And this throne did not remain stationary. According to the letter, the king could command this throne to carry him through the air, enabling him to survey his entire domain or travel swiftly to any corner of his realm. This was not a chariot of the gods or a mystical cloud. It was a piece of furniture with a function, a royal seat that doubled as a personal aircraft. The letter's descriptions extended to other devices that sound eerily prescient, like mirrors that could show events happening in distant provinces, a clear analog for surveillance or broadcast technology. For medieval Europeans weary of conflict and yearning for a powerful ally, the legend of Prester John was a perfect projection of their deepest hopes. He represented a divine counterbalance to Islamic powers, a symbol of Christian unity and technological supremacy located in the mysterious East. The flying throne was the ultimate emblem of that supremacy, a tool of perfect governance and control. It fits seamlessly into the motifs of medieval Romance literature, where magical flight was often achieved through enchanted objects like carpets or ships. Yet the specificity here feels different, less about personal adventure and more about statecraft and observation. The legend had a tangible historical impact. It fueled the age of exploration, driving figures like Prince Henry the Navigator and later Portuguese explorers to search for this lost Christian kingdom, hoping to forge an alliance that would change the world. Their voyages, while they never found Prester John, ended up mapping the coast of Africa and opening new global routes. So we must ask, why did the medieval European imagination conjure such a precise technological wonder in a distant, fictional land? Perhaps because the concept of mechanized flight felt so impossible in their own world that it could only exist in a realm of pure fantasy and divine favor. The flying throne was a dream of absolute power and perfect knowledge, a fantasy of overcoming the earthly limits of distance and time. It reveals how the human mind, when confronted with its own technological constraints, will project the solution onto a mythical elsewhere, creating a blueprint for the future in the guise of a legend. This habit of encoding wonder and direction into a visual form finds its ultimate expression not in a forged letter, but in a mysterious object that is both a map and a three-dimensional puzzle. The world was still being drawn in the year 1513, its edges fading into myth. In that year, an Ottoman admiral and cartographer named Piri Reis compiled a world map, a stunning synthesis of Portuguese, Arabic, and older sources. Today, only a fragment of this map survives, but it is a fragment that has ignited one of the most enduring controversies in the history of exploration. The map, drawn with remarkable precision for its time, shows coastlines of Europe, Africa, and parts of the Americas. But the detail that has caused decades of debate lies at its southern extreme. There, a landmass is depicted that many researchers believe represents the northern coastline of Antarctica, a continent that would not be officially discovered for another 300 years. More astonishingly, this coastline appears to be drawn free of ice, showing bays, inlets, and topographic features that align with subglacial surveys of the continent made in the 20th century using seismic and radar technology. How could a 16th century admiral have charted a land buried under miles of ice for at least 6,000 years? Piri Reis himself provided a clue in his own annotations on the map. He wrote that he had used source maps from the time of Alexander the Great and even older charts, suggesting he was not the original surveyor, but a compiler of ancient geographical knowledge passed down through the ages. This transforms the map from a simple artifact into a potential textual palimpsest, a later copy containing information from a much older and far more advanced source. The implications are staggering. If the map truly shows an ice-free Antarctica, it implies that someone mapped that continent in a remote epoch when its coasts were exposed, a period geologists confirm ended many millennia before any known civilization arose. This is where the theory of Professor Charles Hapgood enters the picture. In the 1960s, Hapgood, a historian of science, proposed that the accuracy of the Piri Reis map and others like it could only be explained by the existence of a sophisticated, global maritime civilization in deep prehistory, a civilization that possessed advanced cartographic knowledge later lost. He suggested this knowledge might have been preserved in the Great Library of Alexandria, and fragments later found their way to Constantinople, where Piri Reis accessed them. The mainstream cartographic community offers a different explanation. They argue that the southern landmass on the Piri Reis map is likely a composite of guesswork, misplotted sightings of the southern tip of South America, and the common medieval tendency to fill blank spaces on maps with speculative terra incognita. They point out that the map contains clear errors and that the apparent match with Antarctica's subglacial coastline could be a coincidence, a case of seeing a pattern where none was intended. Yet the question posed by Hapgood and others remains hauntingly persistent. If an ancient civilization did achieve such a feat of global mapping, how did they accomplish it? The sheer scale and accuracy required suggest a vantage point beyond walking the coastlines. One proposed method fitting our theme is aerial reconnaissance. Could the source maps used by Piri Reis have been derived from surveys conducted from a great height, allowing for the kind of synoptic, continental scale perspective needed to draft such a chart? It is a speculative leap, but it directly connects this cartographic mystery to our broader inquiry. The Piri Reis map forces us to confront a profound possibility that the timeline of human discovery is not a straight line but a circle, or perhaps a spiral where knowledge is gained, lost, and then glimpsed again in the faded ink of an admiral's chart. It asks us, if not from a perspective in the sky, then from what unimaginable method did ancient geographers perceive the true shape of a frozen, hidden continent? This puzzle of preserved ancient knowledge finds a resonant echo not in another map, but in the epic oral poetry of the frozen north. The frozen seas of the Norse sagas were crossed by a ship unlike any other. Its name was Skidbladnir, and it was said to be the finest vessel ever built, crafted by the master dwarven smiths for the god Frey. Described in the prose Edda by the scholar Snorri Sturluson, this ship possessed two extraordinary qualities. First, it could be folded up like a piece of cloth and carried in a pocket when not needed. Second, whenever its sails were raised, it would always catch a favorable wind, allowing it to sail not just on water, but over land and sea with impossible speed and directness. This was not merely a fast boat, it was a vessel that defied the fundamental constraints of Viking maritime life, the unpredictability of weather, and the limitations of harbor space. Alongside Skidbladnir, the Norse pantheon brimmed with similar marvels of travel. Odin, the All-Father, rode an 8-legged horse named Sleipnir, an animal capable of galloping through the air and between the worlds of the living and the dead. Thor, the god of thunder, had a chariot drawn by two magical goats, Tangrisnir and Tangjoster, which could be slain, eaten, and resurrected the next day to continue their journeys. For the Vikings, a culture of explorers and storytellers, these narratives held deep symbolic power. Norse mythology scholar Dr. John Lindo explains that these artifacts represent the ultimate tools, the perfect expression of a culture's values. Skidbladnir is the ideal ship, embodying portability, reliability, and absolute mastery over the hostile elements. It is a fantasy of perfect utility, born from a people whose lives and fortunes were intimately tied to the capricious sea. Yet the descriptions invite a more speculative interpretation. What does a foldable ship that always finds the perfect wind actually describe? In a modern context, it sounds less like magic and more like advanced engineering. The ability to collapse for easy storage suggests a modular or transformative design. The guarantee of favorable wind implies a propulsion system independent of natural weather patterns, a form of guided or internal propulsion. Could this myth be a distant cultural memory of a different kind of vehicle, one adaptable to various terrains, land, sea, and perhaps even air, whose operating principles were forgotten, leaving only the wondrous outcome in the stories. The Norse gods did not just possess powerful weapons, they possessed perfect tools for mobility and control. This raises a reflective question for us today. Do these myths of flawless, almost technological artifacts point to a deep-seated human ideal, a memory of a time when tools were perfectly suited to human need? Or could they be fragmented echoes of a time when such mastery was not just a dream, but a forgotten reality? The sagas present a world where the boundaries between the magical and the mechanical are beautifully blurred, where the greatest treasures are those that conquer distance and disorder. This theme of magical navigation across vast oceans finds a profound parallel in the oral histories of the Pacific, where entire cultures traced their origins to wayfinders who mastered the stars and the open sea with a skill that seemed itself supernatural. The Pacific Ocean was not a barrier but a highway of stars and swells. For the Polynesian voyagers, the greatest vehicle was not a machine of metal, but the double-hulled canoe, a vessel of wood and fiber that became an extension of their own senses. Theirs was a technology of profound intimacy, a mastery over a fluid, three-dimensional realm that required navigating the sky above as surely as the sea below. This was wayfinding, a sophisticated system passed down through chants and oral traditions for thousands of years. It was a living text written in the movements of nature, not on parchment. Modern masters like Nainoa Thompson of the Polynesian Voyaging Society speak of this knowledge as a deep conversation with the environment. Navigators memorize the precise rising and setting points of hundreds of stars, creating a mental star compass that turned the night sky into a fixed map. They learned to read subtle shifts in ocean swells, feeling the rebounding waves that hinted at distant islands beyond the horizon. They watched the flight patterns of birds, knowing which species flew out to sea to fish and would reliably lead a canoe back to land. This was not guesswork, it was a precise, repeatable science of observation, a cognitive technology as advanced as any written manual. The Great Migration stories speak of a legendary homeland called Hawaii, a place from which explorers set out to settle islands scattered across millions of square miles of open ocean. The chants that guided them are archives of environmental data, preserving knowledge of currents, winds, and star paths for generations. This raises a fascinating speculative question for our theme. The lore speaks of great voyages, of canoes that seem to fly across the trackless ocean with purpose and speed. Given the almost supernatural skill this represents to the modern mind, could these stories of swift, star-guided travel preserve a cultural memory of something even more advanced? Some researchers wonder if this pinnacle of maritime knowledge itself might be a legacy from an even older, perhaps more technologically capable culture, whose understanding of the heavens and the earth was so complete it appears to us as magic. The Polynesian navigator did not need a mechanical wing, for he had mastered the aerial realm in its purest form, using the constellations as his chart and the wind as his engine. This deep connection between sky and journey brings us to our final and most purely speculative ancient text, one that exists not in a library but in the collective imagination of a field of study. A leather-bound manuscript emerged in the Netherlands in the 1860s, written in a strange script and claiming to rewrite human history. This is the Ora Linda book, a document that presents itself as the chronicle of a Frisian people, passed down through generations of mothers, covering an astonishing 13,000 years. Within its pages, it describes a sophisticated, matriarchal civilization with knowledge far beyond its time. Most intriguingly, it speaks of advanced technology, including flying wheels that could traverse great distances and complex systems for controlling the weather, tools used by their wise ancestors to guide and protect their society. The text also recounts a catastrophic global flood, a familiar echo from other ancient traditions which devastated this advanced culture. For a moment in the late 19th century, it sparked fervent debate, offering a tantalizing vision of a lost Nordic golden age. Historians and linguists, however, were quick to dissect its claims. The language was a pastiche, the script a modern invention, and the historical details anachronistic. The consensus is overwhelming. The Oera Linda book is a forgery, likely crafted in the mid-1800s. Its emergence coincided perfectly with a surge in European Romantic nationalism and a growing fascination with the occult and lost civilizations like Atlantis. It provided a manufactured pedigree, a glorious ancient history for a specific people, wrapped in the appealing ideals of maternal wisdom and technological prowess. So why include a known forgery in this exploration? Its value lies not in its historical truth, but as a profound cultural symptom. The forger did not invent these ideas from nothing. They tapped into a deep, pre-existing vein of longing, a widespread archetype of a wise, advanced past that was lost to catastrophe. The flying wheels and weather control described in the Oera Linda book are not original. They are reflections of the same mysterious motifs we have seen in genuine ancient texts worldwide. This fabricated chronicle proves how powerful and persistent the idea of ancient aerial technology truly is, so powerful that someone felt compelled to create physical evidence for it. The existence of such a detailed forgery tells us more about the forger's era and our own enduring desires than about the ancient past. It reveals a human hunger to believe that our ancestors were not primitive but pinnacles of knowledge, that a great reset occurred, and that the clues to their mastery might still be found. It shows how the line between mythology, speculation, and outright fabrication can blur when we yearn for a particular narrative. What does it say about us that we are so willing to imagine and even create proofs of a past that soars above our current understanding? This manufactured manuscript serves as a cautionary tale about the stories we wish were true, and a mirror reflecting our timeless fascination with the possibility of forgotten flight. From this world of modern myth-making, we must ground ourselves in something tangible, an artifact whose physical reality is unquestioned, but whose purpose remains one of history's most captivating puzzles. The final artifact in our collection is not a manuscript but a model, a text carved from sycamore wood. In 1898, within a tomb at Saqqara dating to around 200 years before the Common Era, archaeologists uncovered a small, sleek object that looked startlingly out of place. It was a bird, they thought, but its form was all wrong. This is the Saqqara bird, a hand-sized artifact that has sat quietly in the Cairo Museum for over a century, whispering a single, persistent question. Its wings are straight, tapered, and perfectly angled, not shaped for flapping but for slicing through air. Its body is a smooth, aerodynamic fuselage. Most tellingly, it possesses a distinct vertical tail fin, a feature no bird on Earth has. This tail fin is not decorative, it is functional, a stabilizer designed to prevent a craft from spinning out of control in flight. This object is a three-dimensional argument, a physical hypothesis left by an ancient hand. To hold it is to hold a mystery you can feel, a puzzle that bridges the gap between symbolic art and applied science. The debate around the Saqqara bird centers on two compelling and opposing interpretations. The mainstream archaeological view is that it is a ceremonial object or a child's toy, likely a stylized representation of a falcon, the bird sacred to the god Horus. Proponents of this theory point out that the slot in the tail, where a separate piece would have been attached, probably held a vertical stabilizer shaped like a bird's tail feathers, completing a more conventional avian form. They see it as a beautiful but ultimately terrestrial artifact. The other interpretation, championed by researchers like Dr. Kolul Messiha an Egyptian archaeologist and aerodynamics enthusiast, is far more provocative. Messiha, studying the object in the 1970s, was struck by its proportions. He noted that the wings are aerofoil in cross-section, meaning they are shaped to generate lift, exactly like the wing of a modern glider. The angle of the wings, or dihedral, provides inherent stability. Intrigued, he and others built scaled-up, weighted replicas of the design. When launched, these models did not tumble or stall. They flew. They demonstrated a stable, graceful glide, proving the object's form is inherently aerodynamic. This testing suggests the ancient craftsman who carved it understood, either through observation, intuition, or inherited knowledge, principles that would not be formally articulated until the age of Da Vinci and the Wright brothers. So we are left with a tangible fork in the road. Is the Saqqara bird a coincidence of design, a toy that accidentally stumbles upon aerodynamic truth? Or is it something else entirely, a scale model of something larger? This is the core of its mystery. If it is a model, it implies the existence of a prototype. What might that original have been? Could it represent a ceremonial barge or a weather vane designed for symbolic journeys? Or does it point to something more direct, a testament to early experimentation with gliding flight, perhaps using lightweight materials like papyrus and wood? There is no evidence of propulsion, no hint of an engine, which aligns perfectly with the concept of a glider launched from a high dune or a temple platform. The idea is not that the ancient Egyptians had powered aircraft, but that they may have observed and harnessed the principles of aerodynamics, turning the relentless desert wind into a force for brief, majestic ascent. The artifact forces us to reconsider the limits of their curiosity. They built monuments that aligned with celestial bodies and mastered hydraulic engineering to tame a river. Is it so unthinkable that they also looked to the sky, not just for gods but for geometry? The Saqqara bird serves as the perfect physical conclusion to our journey through 25 texts. It brings our exploration out of the realm of words and visions and into the realm of touch and testable form. It is a silent, wooden question posed across 2 millennia. Whether it is a child's toy touched by serendipitous genius or a craftsman's deliberate study of lift and stability, its very existence challenges the linear narrative of technological progress. It suggests that the dream of flight, and perhaps even its practical principles, is far older, more widespread, and more deeply embedded in the human story than our textbooks have led us to believe. This small artifact from the sands of Egypt does not provide a definitive answer, but it makes the question inescapably real. And in doing so, it turns our gaze from the scattered pages of history upward, inviting us to wonder what other secrets are still buried, not in tombs but in plain sight, waiting for a new perspective to give them wings. These scattered fragments from across the globe begin to form a startling, unified picture when held side by side. From the Vimanas of India to the fiery chariots of Ezekiel, from the solar bark of Egypt to the flying throne of Prester John, a consistent vocabulary emerges. Cultures that never met, separated by oceans and millennia, all described the sky as a traversable realm, navigated not by magic alone but by vehicles. These were not amorphous clouds or spiritual essences, but structured craft, often with defined pilots, propulsion systems, and operational characteristics. They spoke of anti-gravity, of engines powered by mercury or whirlwinds, of materials like shining iron and crystal. Perhaps most tellingly, they universally associated this technology with the highest echelons of power, whether divine kings, creator gods, or angelic beings. This was the ultimate knowledge, the signature of a supreme intelligence. So how do we explain this chorus of similarity rising from isolated corners of the ancient world? Scholars of comparative mythology have long studied these parallels. They often point to the shared architecture of the human mind, our innate tendency to explain the awe-inspiring and inexplicable through similar symbolic stories. The sun, a daily miracle, becomes a chariot. The dream of transcendence becomes a flight to heaven. This psychological interpretation suggests these are not historical accounts, but profound metaphors born from universal human experience, a collective unconscious expressing the same hopes and fears. Another school of thought considers cultural diffusion, the slow, ancient exchange of ideas along trade routes, where a story from Mesopotamia might eventually find its way to India, transforming along the journey. Yet, some researchers find these explanations incomplete when faced with the technical specificity in some texts. This is where a more controversial framework enters, often called the paleocontact or ancient astronaut hypothesis. Proponents like author and researcher David Hatcher Childress argue that the consistency and mechanical detail point to a different possibility, that these stories are fragmented memories of actual contact with a more advanced civilization, perhaps even extraterrestrial, whose technology was so far beyond understanding it was interpreted as divine. This idea seeks to explain not just the vehicles, but the sudden leaps in knowledge sometimes attributed to culture bringing gods, like the Watchers in the Book of Enoch or Viracocha in the Andes. Mainstream academics urge profound caution here, highlighting the risk of confirmation bias, of selectively interpreting ancient poetry to fit a modern technological narrative while ignoring its cultural and religious context. They remind us that our ancestors were brilliant poets and philosophers, not primitive reporters lacking imagination. The truth likely resides in a complex blend of these ideas. But one particularly compelling thread connects many of these traditions, a potential catalyst that could turn advanced reality into legendary memory, the recurring motif of a global cataclysm. The Flood. This story is perhaps the most widespread myth on Earth, found in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Bible, the Popol Vuh, and dozens of other cultures. What if such an event, whether a comet impact, rapid sea level rise, or a series of natural disasters, did more than reshape coastlines? What if it fractured and reset human civilization? In this scenario, a sophisticated global culture or several advanced pockets of innovation could have been shattered. Their knowledge, their technology, would have become incomprehensible to the scattered survivors struggling in a post-cataclysmic world. The machines that once flew would be remembered only as the chariots of the gods who came before the flood. The great maps would become cryptic heirlooms. The principles of engineering would devolve into recipes for magic. This is not a claim, but a thought experiment that makes the puzzle pieces fit differently. It provides a plausible bridge between a potential technological past and the mythological present we find in the texts. It explains why the descriptions feel both precise and impossible, like a blurred photograph of something real. So we are left at a crossroads of interpretation, holding three distinct lenses. The first sees beautiful coincidence, the shared poetry of humankind. The second sees misunderstood history, the literal recording of extraordinary events. The third sees a forgotten epoch, a lost chapter in the human story erased by catastrophe. Your choice of lens changes everything. It changes how you read an epic poem, how you look at a desert glyph, how you hold a wooden model from a tomb. Do these 25 threads form a random pattern, a tapestry of independent dreams, or do they hint at a common source, a single, stunning reality woven into the foundational myths of our species? The answer you lean toward depends less on the artifacts themselves, and more on what you believe is possible within the vast, uncharted landscape of our past. This collection of 25 fragments forms a single, resonant question echoing across time. From the detailed blueprints of the Vaimanika Shastra to the silent, aerodynamic form of the Saqqara bird, we have traced a pattern that spans continents and cultures. Our ancestors, whether through profound imagination, meticulous observation, or inherited memory, consistently placed the power of flight at the very heart of their understanding of the cosmos, divinity, and human potential. This is the overarching revelation, a chorus of voices from isolated corners of the ancient world, all speaking of skies traversed by vehicles, not just spirits. These accounts challenge the comforting simplicity of a linear historical timeline, where progress is a straight, unbroken arrow from primitive to advanced. Instead, they suggest a far more complex and intriguing landscape, one of peaks and valleys, of knowledge gained, lost, and perhaps glimpsed again in the distorted mirror of myth. The key takeaway is not a definitive claim about ancient astronauts or lost civilizations, but an invitation to intellectual humility. These texts urge us to keep an open mind about the depth and sophistication of ancient thought. They ask us to reconsider what primitive truly means and to appreciate that the human drive to conquer the sky is not a modern ambition, but a timeless one, etched into our oldest stories. Our conventional history books chart the tangible, the artifacts we can hold, and the ruins we can excavate. But what of the intangible, the ideas, the dreams, and the witnessed wonders that were too incredible to be recorded as anything but legend? This exploration asks us to make room for that possibility, to see these narratives not as childish fantasies, but as potential containers for a different kind of truth. This reflection holds profound relevance for us today, as we stand on the cusp of a new age of space exploration. Developing reusable rockets and planning settlements on other worlds, we are actively turning our own science fiction into reality. In doing so, we might be unconsciously retracing steps, rediscovering aerodynamic principles or propulsion concepts that were once understood, at least in part, by curious minds millennia ago. The legendary British science fiction author Arthur C. Clarke formulated a third law that feels uniquely pertinent here. He stated that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Let us sit with that thought for a moment. Perhaps the fiery chariots, the celestial barks, and the flying thrones that fill our ancient texts were not magic at all to those who first described them. Perhaps they were someone else's technology, witnessed by people who lacked the vocabulary for engines and alloys, and could only explain them through the language of divinity, wonder, and awe. The journey does not end here. This is merely a starting point, a map to a vast and fascinating field of study. We encourage you to delve deeper, seek out translations of these texts from the Epic of Etana to the Popol Vuh. Read the analyses from both mainstream historians and alternative researchers, weighing their arguments side by side. Visit museums and look at artifacts like the Saqqara bird with a fresh perspective, asking your own questions. History is not a closed book but an ongoing conversation, and your curiosity is a vital part of it. We would love to hear your perspective. Which of these 25 accounts resonated most with you? Do you see a pattern of shared imagination or something more? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us continue this exploration together. If journeys into the unexplained corners of our past intrigue you, consider subscribing. There are always more mysteries to uncover, more stories waiting to be heard from the silent stones and fading manuscripts of antiquity. Thank you for joining us on this flight through the skies of the past. Keep looking up and keep wondering.